lovely to be in Kilmore Quay, both of our first times here, I think, and to be talking to the wonderful Charlotte Mendelson. And Sasha's done such a great job of interviewing you that I won't go on more. But I just do want to talk about the gardening thing, because Charlotte is the gardening correspondent of the New Yorker. I mean, did anyone even know there was a gardening correspondent in the New Yorker? But she writes beautiful columns for it. And I thought what might be fun, because I know it's your first time here, but that you have a lot of Irish connections in weird ways from childhood. So maybe you could just, because Irish people, we love hearing about that, about how much you love Ireland. Tell us about your first experiences and why you have, because the family in this book are Hanrahans.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yes. I am a pathetically eager Irish wannabe, I have to say. So despite my pre-war BBC British accent, I'm not posh. And when I was little, my dad decided that we should go on holiday to Ireland. I don't think he'd ever been, but you've got to applaud the spirit. And he booked some rooms in a bed and breakfast somewhere in County Cork. And the whole point was there were animals for his little town children, and wonderful food, and fresh potatoes. And we turned up, and this is the version that's come down through the family to me. We turned up, and forgive me if this is offensive to anyone, but starting as I mean to go on, as my mum tells it, there was a flashing Jesus, and I now understand what she means. But I always assumed it meant. Okay, so all right, and then there were no animals. This is how they tell it. There were no animals, and the mashed potato was instant, and so
smash.
Smash. I mean, I can stay in London for that. So they thought, no, we're not doing this. So they drove around a bit, and in the back of the car, my dad had a sort of guidebook to Ireland, and there was this place that he found in it, and it was a sort of relaxed, lovely, good food because we're a very greedy family, like a kind of family farmy hotel. So we rocked up there, and it was lovely, and we stayed, and basically we ran around with the grandchildren and got the eggs, and it was completely wonderful, and we spent every summer there when I was growing up.
And where was it?
Ballymaloe. But
this is an old farmhouse type of thing.
This is what's so amazing. So this was I'm 50, this was in the 70s, and it was not
Ballymaloe.
It was not famous, it wasn't posh, it was just this completely lovely place with unexpectedly good food, and we just messed around. And so I'm incredibly lucky that that was my introduction to Ireland. Roisín said, well, no wonder you love it so much. So also I have a very, very sentimental idea about Irish food, that but I've come back to Ireland whenever I can, and I read a lot of Irish books, and I'm just obsessed. And now I have an Irish partner, which I think was very clever of me. And as she likes pointing out, it's all for the road frontage, basically. So I'm in it for the road frontage. And but I've never been here. I've never even been to County Wexford.
Yeah.
And it's just very exciting. So basically, I'm hoping I can sort of stow away behind a sail or something, and just never leave.
Well, I think, we love her, don't we, for that Ballymaloe story.
True.
And as I said, this family, this mad family in the Exhibitionist is called Hanrahan.
Yeah.
So there's a little Irish connection there. I think the mother of Ray is from Limerick, maybe?
No, it's a kind of in-joke, because it's the couple in it, Ray and Lucia. Lucia is London Irish. Her parents are like my best friend's family. They're Irish, but they were in London. He used to work at the car factory. But the man she's married, who's very unpleasantly anti-Irish, his surname is Hanrahan. And I never make the point that, where's that surname come from, Ray? But for people who are noticing, I want them to think, come on, you're as Irish as she is.
I know, exactly. But tell us more about the family then. Lucia is this, actually I was talking to someone, Alex Clark, are you here? Yes. I was talking to Alex about the book, and she says a lovely thing, or very interesting thing, about how in many families there's a silent woman trying to escape a prison. And I think that really describes Lucia. So maybe tell us a bit about what she's going through with Ray, this egomaniacal artist who is not as talented as Lucia, but looms large in everything, and she has to kind of stifle her own amazing talent in order to deal with this monster that she's married to.
So I think there are a lot of marriages, a lot of relationships often where both people are creative, but not exclusively, usually but not exclusively heterosexual, just very common where one, let's say the husband, is a sort of mixture of charismatic and tyrannical, and everyone's on eggshells. Everyone has to keep them happy. And it's a particular thing if both of them are writers or artists. We all know about those families where you go, oh, his wife is an artist too, I hadn't realised. Yeah. And then you see the pictures and go, oh, okay. So it's so often, that daddy is this great artist and everyone has to, respect him and massage his ego. And actually, the mum's also a really good artist, but she's been bringing up the kids and massaging his ego and promoting his career. And it's such a common thing. And so I was really interested in that, the idea of a couple where they're both doing the same thing, and in the idea of a couple where one is sort of the handmaiden to the other one, and how often those two things go together. So Lucia, she's in her early 50s. I keep doing this. I keep writing books where I then become the age of the person that I've written as someone a bit older than me. Anyway, so Lucy's in her early 50s. She's got 3 children and she's with this man. He was famous for one painting. You know those people where they had a stir and they've never got over it. So
it was called Screw, is that right?
Screw.
Yeah, of course it was called Screw.
It would be called Screw.
Yeah.
And he was her teacher at university. He's at art school. He's older than her. Another interesting dynamic. And they both agree she's very lucky to be with him. And all this time she's been sort of trying to suppress her ambition in all sorts of ways. But her ambitions never really died. She is an artist. But also, he is a very lazy painter. She is naturally, and I'm not an artist, I don't really know anything about art, so I had to kind of make it up and hope that I got away with it. She naturally is one of those sort of sculptors who does huge things, which is obviously quite hard to do kind of at the kitchen table. And every now and again he'd say, oh, darling, get on with your art. And she'd kind of think, I've got to take the kids to the optician. So it's difficult for her, but gradually her desire to create has grown. And also, her career has sort of grown, but she's been trying to suppress it for Ray's ego. Because it's not worth it for her marriage. It's not worth how upset he'll be if she does well. And then, because one of the things I love writing about in my 758 novels, thank you, Sasha, so I love writing about family dynamics, because I think that's the most interesting thing in the world. And I love writing about people under pressure. And the family is the best example of that, because everyone thinks they know everything about everyone. The family you grow up in, your siblings, your parents, the neighbours, the cousins, all think they know what you are. And if they're wrong, it's very difficult, but it's also a source of drama. So this novel is set over the weekend when this whole combination of things are happening. Ray is having an exhibition. He is the exhibitionist. Ray is having this exhibition, his first since the 80s. But Lucia is just being offered this amazing opportunity as an artist. So of course it's all going to go horribly wrong, which is basically my motto.
And we have to talk about the children too, because again, in terms of family dynamics, and like you say, people interpreting and perceiving things very differently. There's 3 children, each of whom has a very different kind of take on this father figure. One of them thinks he's brilliant, and the other one, who's run away to Scotland and doesn't really, is almost trying to escape her own domestic prison as well. And then the son is living in a caravan down the end of the garden, and would love his father to think something of him, but doesn't. So tell us what you were doing with those children as well, and that dynamic in the family.
Well, so I have this very strong belief that, so a lot of my favourite people are the ones who got away. So they're the ones who don't live, well, unlike you, but you've got a great mum, so it's different. The ones who get away from the messed up family. And so Jess, who's sort of the other main protagonist, who's one of the daughters, is living in Edinburgh, is trying to kind of get her dad out of her head. And I think the idea for Jess, I remember, slightly strange, I remember being in the car on the way back from my grandmother's funeral several years ago, and my mum's best friend was driving me, and she said, you know, there's always someone in a family whose eyes are wide open.
Yeah.
And that's Jess. Jess is the one who's sort of basically thinking, I can't abandon you, you're all nutcases, I've got to get out. And then there's her sister, because I also think in families, especially when one parent is really difficult, there's so often one child, however grown up they might be, who's so damaged by it that they invest everything in maintaining the myth, you know. They're the ones who insist that, you know, Dad's great and Dad's a wonderful artist, and blah, blah, blah. So, and then there's the one who's broken. So there's the one who gets away, the one who stays in it desperately, and the one who's kind of broken by it. So one of the challenges was how to make them all either move on or definitively not move on in the course of the weekend.
Mm. And Sasha mentioned how much of a funny writer you are, and a lot of it is very, very funny. And I thought it might be fun if you read a certain bit, because the book was longlisted, I think, and shortlisted for the Women's Comedy.
It was shortlisted for women, which I was very surprised by. But
but it's really funny. So I think this is a really good bit. I know you like reading this bit, so that's why I asked you.
I have a terrible problem. I think one of the reasons I write jokes is because I find them hilarious. And in Daughters of Jerusalem, which is my second novel, which is my secret favourite, there's a bit that I used to read from the beginning, which would always give me the giggles. It was really embarrassing. I think that's also one of the reasons why I'm such an overwhelmingly sort of Irish wannabe, that I think Irish people and Jewish people similarly have a sort of, life is terrible, let's laugh.
Yeah. So this is a list, isn't it? And this gives an insight into Ray,
Ray, the horrible dad. So Leah, who is the kind of good girl daughter, the one who has basically sacrificed her life for her father. So Leah is the one who's been organising the whole exhibition for him. And I think we can all guess that the exhibition perhaps won't go as well as they're expecting. But anyway, Leah's barely sleeping. Her mind won't stop spooling. As long as nobody drags their chairs on the floor, or makes a sudden noise, or forgets one of his dislikes, cathedral towns, shrubs, supermarkets, wallpaper, exercise, English people with good French accents, umbrellas, health food, tomato-based pasta sauces, cut flowers, Beethoven, abstinence from anything, post-war fiction, peonies, digital clocks, thin pillows, but also overfilled pillows, all the neighbours, hoop earrings, bread ends, pitted olives, infants being carried in slings, Italy weak, shop-bought jam, raw vegetables, food without enough salt or butter, the council, headphones, or audible music not of his choosing, leftovers, libraries, people who do A-levels, people who go to university, Wales and Scotland, loud sneezing, school children, birds unless for eating, teachers, the county of Essex, Germans and German art collectors, attempts to avoid cancer, champagne, milk not in glass bottles, illness, sorbet, television newsreaders, certain women's haircuts, short or showy off, cats other than Paisley, banks, everything pertaining to the London Irish, the dark, bad fathers, unfaithful wives. There isn't a single reason why this exhibition won't be a triumph.
Brilliant, round of applause. The thing about being a novelist, Charlotte, is, and you've spoken about this before, is that you have to be very nosy, I think, to be a good
Very, very nosy.
Very, very nosy. So she's probably, if she...
Oh, look. It's Ray's spirit spying on us.
So, in terms of getting under, you said you didn't know anything about art. In terms of getting under Lucia's skin, then, what was it that you went to do? I mean, she's quite person who, like you say, makes these huge things, a lot of wire and lots of mad materials and everything. So how did you go about being nosy and researching that?
Well, it was brilliant because the thing is that this is my gardening side. I really love getting completely filthy, and mud and tools and wood and all of those things completely thrill me, but I'm also a totally impractical person. So it's lucky I'm not a sculptor because I would basically have no arms by now. In fact, I have an allotment and I've said to my surrounding neighbours, if I ask to borrow a power tool, however convincingly, just don't let me. Because, but the thing is, I've always kind of wanted stuff from that world, and the idea for her being an artist was, I was in Cornwall in England, and I went to the Barbara Hepworth studio. Has anyone been there? It's really fantastic, and you get to look through this sort of window and see her studio as it would have been. And Barbara Hepworth had children, but was married to Ben Nicholson, also an artist, but was a famous artist. So that's an interesting example. How did that marriage work? And just the sight of her stuff, the chisels, all that covetable stuff. My tool for work is basically I sit at a laptop going like that, which is no fun. So it was partly an excuse to write about that. So I went to an artist studio. I talked to a couple of friends who were artists. I always, one of the things, so did you have play school here when you were little?
Yeah, like you go to nursery school.
Yeah.
Oh, play school TV.
The telly.
Yeah, behind the round window and the square window, yes.
That was one of the formative experiences of my life.
Yeah.
Play school, the round window and stuff. When they'd show
Jemima.
people's job. No, I hated Jemima.
Okay.
I hated all the toys, but the best bit was when they showed you people's work.
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Someone worked in a chocolate factory or
exactly.
Yeah.
And I loved that. And so really one of the things about being a novelist is it's an excuse to say, so what exactly does milking a goat feel like, or whatever? So basically I got to ask very specific questions. So like, how big are the stickers that you put on a sold painting? And they go, well, about this and that. Because I love that kind of detail of people's jobs and lives and like the special words they use.
And I know people often ask this of female novelists, particularly about how autobiographical stuff is, but inevitably you bring stuff from your own life. But when your fascination with family, does it go back to your fascination with your own family, or can you tell us a little bit about your dynamic that might bleed into the book sometimes?
My family's completely normal.
Perfect, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're all totally fine and
Functional.
absolutely functional. They love all my books.
Nobody runs away.
Nobody ever runs to a different county ever. No, I'm just thinking, thank God this is Ireland, not England.
You're free here. This is a very safe space.
Yeah. I always think, oh my God, where to begin?
Give us a bit of history, because it is your family background is very interesting.
So, my family background is, so I'm second generation English. My grandparents were born in Central Europe, and I don't even know where to begin on this, but basically, I'm very interested in what it's like not to fit in. For lots of reasons. So one of the things about the Exhibitionist is, so Lucia is London Irish, because I want to write about that feeling of not being... So Ray, despite his Irish surname, is kind of in the establishment, you know what I mean? He has that kind of complacency maybe, or entitlement. And Lucia doesn't. Lucia has never felt good enough, imposter syndrome, all of these things. And I suppose I wanted to write about that, but I want to write about other people, not just me. So her being an artist, her being London Irish, her being these other things is a sort of way of exploring a different version of that. Because I really think, I'm very opinionated about a lot of things, mainly books. And I do think that we read to be in someone else's life. And the more convincingly the writer makes you feel you're in someone else's life, then I think that's our duty as writers. Most of us can write a good sentence, but that doesn't make a good novel. That doesn't make a novel where you forget your stop on the train. And that, for me, is the ultimate thing. I want to make people forget their stops on the train, because that's what I love in fiction. Just like in a soap opera. If you're watching a soap opera, the same thing happens. I think it's our job as writers to entertain, not to go, oh, here's a beautiful sentence, I'm terribly proud of myself. I can't remember where I started.
Well, we were talking about family. I was trying to get you to talk about that, and then you went off. But
Nice
it's still
try.
very interesting.
Let's give it another go.
Yeah.
So
Persistent.
persistent. So I suppose my family was complicated, as many families are, and I suppose it's made me think that families are the most interesting thing because you never stop being your parents' child, however old you are. You never stop being your sibling's sibling. The way that you were when you were little is still kind of all over you when you go home or when you have children of your own. I remember my sister and I, who used to not get on at all, finally kind of found each other only in the last few years. But we recently had to go away with. We had to go away with my. It was a joy. It was
you had to go away with your perfect family.
I had to go away with my perfect family,
Yeah.
and we immediately just became terrible because we
the
reverted.
regretting.
Yeah. So what else can I tell you?
Not fitting in, I suppose, because I think you were born in London but moved to Oxford.
Yeah.
And sort of living near this obviously very academic kind of world. How was that? How was what are your memories of your childhood? And
Well, I am a terrible swot, basically. So I have always been kind of booky. But that doesn't mean you feel like you fit into that world again.
Yeah.
I think I keep writing about people who don't have that sense of fitting in, who don't feel they're good enough. Whether it's in relation to their families or to their wider world. But they also, I'm interested in Englishness from a how interesting and weird kind of point of view. I'm very interested in how the English are about class, but I wouldn't want to write a novel where everyone's just English because I wouldn't understand it. In fact, The Exhibitionist, it took me a very long time to write. In fact, it took 9 years because life events. But it started off at one point, they were just an English family living in fact, Essex. And I just realised I didn't care. I just couldn't care about them. So there needs to be differentness and there needs to be dysfunction for it to be interesting, I think.
And what about your family? You said they all love all your books and think you're great.
It's a complete lie.
Yeah. So what do they think? And are you, when you're in that place and you're trying to create work that makes people miss their tube stop or their bus stop, do you have that voice in your head at all about, oh God, my parents are other people? Yeah. So how do you manage that?
So my dad is a really lovely man, and but he sort of does, he's incredibly brainy, but he doesn't really understand fiction at all. So he's always saying, "Darling, I think maybe your next book should be about something completely different." And Daughters of Jerusalem, he actually gave me a list of corrections. My mum doesn't read my books.
Okay, can we just hold on a moment for a second now?
Yeah.
You mentioned that my mum and I get on very well, and obviously I'll give a little plug to my mum's book, Open Hearted, if anyone wants to buy it. She wrote a memoir at 82, which is amazing. But, I mean, sorry, if I wrote... I mean, my mum reads my column every week.
You'd have nothing to write about. It's like, my mum's great. End.
No, that's true, but I still feel the pang of that for me. I mean, I hear that your mother doesn't read what you do for a living. Makes me immediately sad, even though I've only just met you. So I'm just wondering.
It makes me sad as well, but it also makes me freer. I kind of think, this is terrible. I couldn't say this if it was in England, but I kind of think, well, you should have been nicer to me if you didn't want me to be a novelist. It's kind of true. I mean, I think it would be hard to be a novelist with a really sane family. I'm also really interested in... So, I was a publisher for 20 years, just another way of getting near books, basically. And I always say that I was really bad at it because, I'm a very critical reader. I don't like that many. I love millions of books, but you have to read an awful lot to find those ones you love.
And you have to be very critical in that job, too. You can't just be loving everything.
You have to be. But also, I'm really bad at lying. So publishers traditionally go, yeah, this is the best book he's ever written. It's really wonderful. But I'd be going kind of... so that's no good. But I've always said that my one contribution to the world of publishing was I had this brilliant idea, which for some reason no one has taken up yet, but they will, which is that there should be parents' evenings. And so one day a year, people's families should come into work, and you all go, oh, that's why. Because I am not alone, surely, in thinking that people's families, why they're so weird is one of the most interesting things about them, which is why I read books and why I write books. Because it's so interesting seeing, like, oh, his mum always said he was perfect. Oh, that explains Gerald. So
Her mum doesn't read her book.
her mum doesn't read it, but that's why she writes them. Yeah, she doesn't read my books. My dad's always worried that people will think it's about the Mendelsons. And I was going, no, Dad, it's completely fiction. But at the same time, they genuinely are not my parents. I mean, they are really not.
Yeah.
Because it's a funny thing. I mean, you must feel this with your columns as well, that people always think, oh, you're not going to put me in your book, are you? And I kind of think, well, it's different for you, although there's more fiction, I'm sure, than you're owning. Whereas with me, of course, there's more non-fiction, but at the same time, if I wanted just to write about real people, I'd write a memoir. The whole point of fiction is, I think Sean, whose event we went to earlier, Sean Hewitt, was really interesting about that the way that, so he started off writing a novel, but it turned into memoir. And I think I write fiction so I don't have to say anything's personal.
Yeah.
I think you can be much more honest in fiction than in non-fiction because you're saying, it's not me, it's her, I made her up completely.
Yeah.
She's got blonde hair.
It may have been, she's a really good example of that, where she would do that. A lot of stuff you could tell were thinly veiled or but they were done in a different way. And
it's so interesting, isn't it? Have any of you read the Cazalet Chronicles? So even though they're extremely English and posh, they are totally brilliant. And then they're by Elizabeth Jane Howard. And then if you read her incredibly frank memoir, it's so interesting because you realise all the things that she's used, but she's used them in a different way. So if you're a fiction writer, I'm sure some of you are, I met some earlier, you can write about really personal stuff, but you change it enough so you can really get in there, and hopefully get to the truth more by being able to make things up as well. But also make loads of stuff up, because then you get a go at living as other people.
Yeah. I tend to find that when people say to me, oh, don't put me in your company, they're absolutely, I would never even want to be put in. Anyone who says that, you're kind of going, no, sorry.
But also, you're gagging to go in my company, aren't you?
Well, we just had a sauna this morning, which I can thoroughly recommend, which I know you're going to maybe do.
I would love to do.
And I mean, sitting in that sauna, I'm just like, well, this is an amazing thing to write about. This place is so beautiful, and the thatched cottages, it's like some kind of incredible
so I'm told,
dream.
but actually, the horizontal rain is making it hard to see. But I was thinking, I've got a great big raincoat. I was thinking, could I just go down, grope my way down to the beach later?
Yeah.
But I might just get washed away, but it would be quite a way to go, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Bobbing out to sea.
What about Almost English? Because that's sort of, again, Alex said I should talk to you about that. We're talking about the recovering. Alex is sort of my co-presenter here. Sort of a recovering immigrant and that kind of side of things. I mean, you touched on a bit of the Jewishness there earlier. And when you were in Oxford, there was signs like we would relate to no blacks, no dogs, no Irish is the ones that we in London. But there was also ones no blacks, no Jewish.
Yeah.
So tell us about your...
My dad was, when he was a student, or he was just starting off as an academic, and he... has the microphone just gone weird? No. So I've got such a loud voice, it's very hard to stop. There were signs saying no blacks, no Irish, no Jews, and he once wrote a letter very politely to a landlady who hadn't said that, asking if he could come and stay. And she wrote back. I think on the back in a little. You know how really racist or bigoted people are often quite genteel. He wrote on the back of the envelope in a little kind of box something like no beards. No blacks, no Jews. And my dad was like, well, I'm two of them, so I'm not going to do that one. So Almost English, the clue's in the title. So it's about not fitting in and really wishing you could fit in, because I think if you have immigrant parents or grandparents, there's a lot of shame. There can be a lot of shame. And again, it's a mother and daughter in that book as well, Almost English. And but the mother is English. The mother is the daughter-in-law. And so she doesn't fit into this kind of loud Hungarian family. And the daughter doesn't fit into kind of Englishness, which is where she wants to fit in. So she basically gets herself a scholarship to an English boarding school, which I think we can all predict is not going to go well. And but it's the same thing, and it's that kind of terror. You have as a child, but maybe later on, that you're the one who's kind of extremely voluble grandparents are going to be going, darling, across the kind of playground. And you're pretending you fit in. I'm sort of obsessed with that. And also I'm very easily embarrassed. So I'm always writing about people being embarrassed.
Are you, really?
I write about clumsy people because I'm very clumsy, and people being in very embarrassing situations, just sort of as a way of, it's almost like scratching your back. It's like a way of dealing with it.
Yeah. So growing up then around that kind of quite bookish environment and being with the dreaming spires, dreamy spires, did you have early ambitions to be a writer? Like, was it something from childhood that you wanted to do, or what happened? Did it come later?
I really wanted to, but it never occurred to me I could. I mean, genuinely, I kind of thought you had to be basically Keats. I thought you had to be a male genius, which sounds disingenuous, but it is completely true. I remember thinking it, wouldn't it? It was almost like I was regretfully at the end of my life accepting I'd never be a novelist, aged, 12. And I was incredibly swotty and read all sorts of things. And so Daughters of Jerusalem, in some ways, is what I was like when I was little, because it's just these, absolutely insane little girls who basically think I might as well be dead. I only got 93% in my exam. That was my life. Cool. And I know. And but my dad's very brainy, but we weren't a kind of fiction reading household. It wasn't like that, exactly. It was just, I loved it. I was sort of born, it explains a lot, actually. If I was born reading a book, it explains my mother's attitude to me for corners. Sorry about that. So, I really wanted to, but it didn't occur to me I could. So I just read. And then I went into publishing just to become near authors again. And then it was only when I was in my kind of mid-late 20s, basically, very quick version, I had this boyfriend at university, and his tutor kind of took a shine to me, and not in a yucky way, well, probably in a yucky way, but also, and he knew I wanted to write, but I was never writing. And then you see him and his wife when I was in my late 20s, and he said, look, I know you always want to write, but you never write anything. I'm going to be editing this anthology. Why don't you try? Why don't you write a story? So I said, yes.
And you'd been telling him about this boyfriend, had you?
I'd been telling him about my then boyfriend.
Yeah.
And making him laugh, and he was just like, well, just write that. And so, I can't remember the deadline, we say the 1st of March, and by the sort of 27th of February, I still hadn't sent him my thing. And eventually he rang me up, which was thank God he did. He rang me up and said, where is it? And I said, I know it's stupid, but I just can't. I'm too scared. I'm too scared I'll fail, basically. And he said, sort of, stop being an idiot, just try. But also, I'm co-editing with this very scary woman, so she'll probably say no anyway. So somehow that helped, because it's like, well, nothing will happen. And it got in, and that was the beginning, because then it's a sort of snowball. It's like, well, then you've got to try and write a novel.
And this is the 5th one.
That's the fifth, yeah. And there's the gardening book as well. But I have a weird block about it. I can never remember. When people say, how many novels have you written? I always have to kind of go privately and go, yeah.
Well, this one, the first couple of pages of this edition that I have is like just amazing praise for it, saying how wonderful it is. I was wondering, presumably you don't you don't only get brilliant reviews. How are you with criticism, and what's your take on it? Because some writers don't read them, even if they're good or they're bad or whatever. Where do you stand on critics?
I mean, I always think the thing about novelists is writers are the very worst people in the world to be writers, because we're so kind of excruciated and shy and embarrassed. If we were sane, we'd be lumberjacks, but we're not. So, we are basically the last people in the world who should be going, here's the thing I spent years on, is it any good? Am I any good? Is it any good? It's tragic. So, I have been incredibly lucky with my reviews. I'm always a bit amazed when I see them. But yeah, I'm not good at criticism. So what I do is I really try not to read them, and I hate it if people say, oh, have you read that review in the Times or whatever? I really can't bear it. So I've developed this technique, which I sort of, it sounds really mad, sort of look at it like this.
Sorry, do that again.
So I get a kind of sense, is the word that sticks out grotesque and appalling? No, it's fine.
You're even blushing a bit when you're thinking about it.
So I really hate it. And if I could be in this little bubble where people just said, you've had a really good review, and I'd go, hooray. And then they'd never mention anything else, that would be perfect. Because the thing is, if you are a writer, you're probably massively oversensitive, as I am. And then if someone says, I loved it until this happened, but this is an extremely minor thing, and it doesn't really matter, and the book was a masterpiece, and actually she should have won the Nobel. For months, those words will be jangling in my head, the bit where this happened. Which is why I'm a writer, but at the same time, it's very unhealthy. So I'm really much better off not reading reviews.
And are you a very organised, kind of disciplined person with sitting up at 6
Well, I
o'clock in the
think
morning with your...
I'm not an organised person, but I think you have to be disciplined, because if you just sort of faff around waiting to be inspired, that's the difference between people who go, I want to write a novel one day, and people who are trying to write a novel.
Yeah.
You have to just sit on your bum and write. And so I'm a bit chaotic naturally, but you do just have to treat it as a job. And when, I often, because I'm so addicted to gardening, I have to get out of the house, especially in spring, or summer, or autumn, or parts of winter. I have to get out of the house. So I go to work in the British Library, which is this kind of really, really ugly on the outside, but kind of spectacularly cool building on the inside in central London. And it's great because you it's harder to faff around doing things if you're in front of other people, because you kind of think they'll notice I've got up 6 times in the last half hour. I better sit here trying. And then sometimes words come out. So you have to sort of trick yourself into being bored enough and trapped enough. I often think if someone could just tie me to my chair, but with enough fingers to be able to type, because otherwise I just potter off.
And take off the Wi-Fi and all that.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
I'm so distractible. It's terrible.
And you've just joined Blue Sky now, which is sort of this alternative to Twitter.
Join us.
Yeah.
We're a cult.
Or don't, because
Well,
it just
don't,
eats
go
up your
away.
time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
What are you telling them?
Yeah. So I find it...
Has it gone off, or?
I don't know. No, I don't know.
We'll just keep checking in and see.
I could just... How would we know? They might not be able to hear us. They're just chatting among themselves. So I do find it very... I think you have to be disciplined. You have to take it seriously. Because also, I find writing incredibly difficult, but I'm very aware it's not manual labour.
You're not down the mines.
I'm not down the mines. I'm not a social worker. I'm not doing anything that really saves lives or is physically difficult. So I'm incredibly privileged. I know that. So I do think that the least I could do then is just sit on my bum and try and do it. Much as I'd like to just plant things.
Well, going back to this book, the other interesting sort of dynamic is Lucia has this mental, exhausting kind of thing of having to plumose this guy all the time and put herself down.
That's my one word of Irish. It's such a good word.
Yeah, she's plumosing the whole time, isn't she?
I'm not very good at saying plumosing.
Plumose, yeah.
Plumose, yeah.
That's good. You're practically Irish now.
Well, it's the most important word.
Yeah, but in the meantime, because she's in this very traumatic situation and we do weird things and dysfunctional things, she is also having a bit of a fling.
Yeah.
Maybe talk to us a little bit about that, because through all of your books, there's sort of elements.
Action.
Yeah, that's good sex action.
Good sex action, or kind of...
Or wanting, desire.
So I'm really interested in desire, because I just think... So one of the things about people, one of the reasons I'm a writer is people are so weird and peculiar, where everyone has such stuff under the surface. Everyone's in love with their, husband's brother, or actually once tried to kill their mother-in-law, or people are quite insane quite often. And I think it's fascinating. Everyone does such a good job of seeming normal, but actually, wow. And
we do, don't
it's
we?
True.
Carry on. All of us here, we look quite normal.
People are absolutely, some of us, people are very peculiar, which is one of the brilliant things. And I do think that a lot of people, more people than you would think, are sexually or at least romantically looking in the direction they're not supposed to be looking in. They're in love with the man who runs the post office or whatever. Anyway, so I do keep writing about people having... I keep writing about people in bad relationships, falling in love with other people. Strange. In this, she's been with Ray, she's been totally faithful, she hasn't thought about someone else.
And he, meanwhile,
Ray's been
flaunting these affairs in front of her face.
And he also, Ray, I don't want to say too much, but Ray did have an affair at the worst point in her life. And I think she's never quite recovered from that. And she is a very loyal, loving person, but basically that sort of broke something, I think. And she's fallen for a woman, someone who she never would have thought she would think of anyone other than Ray. And so one of the reasons this weekend that it's set in is such a crisis is because she's simultaneously, there's the Ray exhibition, there's the thing that's suddenly happening to her where she's been offered this huge work thing, and she's going to say no because it's not worth it for her marriage. But finally, there's someone who fancies her and likes her, and it's sort of blown her mind. And I think the point of this novel is, it's the point where a long marriage blows up. Because actually, even though the sort of relationship she's in with this woman is really not a great idea, it liberates her. Because finally, there's someone who wants her and thinks she's great. So,
And she's not used to that.
and she's not used to that. It gives her strength to look at Ray and just think, it's this. All there is this what I want? So she's sort of forced into a situation of making a choice, even though she's not someone who would do that. And I really believe that people who, when people have been in a bad situation or marriage or whatever it is, I think rarely does it just sort of peter out. There has to be a crisis. I think a crisis is what makes most of us do the brave things in our lives.
And it crystallises all the things.
All the things, and actually, and also there's a moment when Jess says something about, being like her, being like Lucia. And I think she thinks, I don't want
to do that.
So it's the sort of moment when everything blows up.
We're going to open it to questions in a moment, but before we do, you mentioned Lucia's like the worst time of her life, and there's a health issue in the book, which is sort of something that you experienced yourself. Maybe tell people a little bit about that, and we'll go if you don't mind.
No, it's fine. It's
just, my mother went through that earlier this year, actually. So
I'm sorry.
No, but she's
I mean, it's a sort of. I'm still not very good at talking about it. And actually, I wrote about it in this book, and it never occurred to me anyone would ask me about it.
Oh, sorry.
No. And then I was on Woman's Hour on BBC Radio 4. I don't know if there's...
We love Woman's Hour.
Oh, do you?
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to assume that...
I know that I do anyway. I'm sure there's other people.
And they said, well, will you talk about that? And I got totally traumatised, and my voice started shaking, and I sort of said, I don't know, I have to think about it. And then I had to go and discuss it with my publishers and just go, it never occurred to me they were going to ask me. And then I thought, I have to talk about it because this is my chance. So the thing is that Lucia had breast cancer, and Ray had this affair when she was basically going through all of it. And I had a kind of similar experience when I was 35. And not the reason I wrote about it, because as I said, I didn't write about it. I knew that some people might read it and it might maybe help a bit, but I didn't think I'd have to talk about it. But when it happened to me, it was so lonely because I was so young and because of various circumstantial things. And I kind of thought, okay, even though it's incredibly hard to talk about, it's really important because if anyone who feels kind of isolated in it, I know there are lots of charities and everyone knows people who've been through it, but it can still be very lonely. And if it helps anyone, so I'm not saying this in a, I'm such a saint way, because I didn't write it for that, but I do think that actually it's really important to, because we all need to see reflections of ourselves in fiction, don't we?
Yeah.
And I think maybe if that is a bit helpful as well, but I have to say that I was so uncool. So the entire time I was talking about it on the radio, I was shaking kind of convulsively. And you can hear, if you know me, you can hear my voice. And then, because I am, as discussed, very clumsy, I came out and they sort of took me into the green room, and there was this kind of low glass coffee table. And I spectacularly fell over it, just to sort of express my trauma. So, yeah, it wasn't easy.
In that Woman's Hour office, which myself and Natasha were lucky enough to be in, and it's a very rarefied air in there, aren't there? The women swanning around.
Yeah, there's a lot of swanning, a lot of very elegant dresses. And so it was absolutely classic. There I am with like blood pouring down my shin.
Yeah. Well, I hope I didn't traumatise you too much, Alison.
No, not at all.
Now, and these lovely people aren't going to traumatise you either, but we will go for a couple of questions. So, thank you so much, by the way. It's been so fascinating talking to you. Who would like to ask Charlotte a question?
Hello. I enjoyed that very much. Thank you. Now, I grew up in England, and I hope this question isn't too personal, and my apologies if it is.
Wow.
But you said you're not posh, but as someone who grew up in England, your accent is very posh.
It's very posh. I totally agree.
Good question.
I totally agree.
Tell us, explain.
And no offence meant whatsoever. I just wondered if that is because you're from an affluent family, or is it second generation elocution lessons, which does also happen? I'm simply curious. I hope you don't mind.
No one has elocution lessons and ends up sounding like a pre-war schoolboy. But And it's not affluence either. It's I think it's because I grew up in Oxford, and quite a lot of people in Oxford have this kind of strange, sort of muffled, posh accent. But I don't know. No one in my family don't sound like this. My sister, who was a massive stoner for about 2.5 decades, talks like this. Oh. So it's all a mystery. My mum says I sound like the Queen, which obviously is particularly insulting now. And so it's not intentional, but it's also not posh. But also the posh thing, I mean, there is something serious in it, which is that I don't think that you can, well, you can be posh and Jewish, but I'm not. You know, my family are not. And so I always want to explain that I'm not posh because I'm not part of, you know, my family haven't been living in, you know, the same suburb of wherever or Buckingham Palace, or you know, the same bit of Berkshire for 13 generations. Yeah. It's just I sound like this. But when I hear other people sounding like this, I think, ugh. So it's all very confusing. But it's certainly not elocution.
Good question. I think you've cleared that one up very well. Who else would like to ask? There's a lady with the, oh, there's somebody. Sarah?
Sorry. I don't, okay. I just wanted to say, so the first ever reflection I saw of myself in literature was when I read Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. And Daughters of Jerusalem was probably the second reflection I really saw of myself. In fact, there was a small little echo in When We Were Bad. And so I just wanted to ask you really how important it is for you to put out sexual preference, sexuality, the release. I mean, I think you've answered probably quite a lot of this during this talk, but how important it is for you to keep doing that in your work.
Well, it's a really interesting question because it's difficult. You know, I want to, politically I want to. I mean, I am a lesbian. I want, you know, that's something that I'm interested in, and I think people who, I call them late onset lesbians. I think there's a lot of it about.
There's a lot of it about.
So much.
I keep hearing so much about it.
Over the place.
I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, and they were like, "My girlfriend," and I said, "What's your girlfriend?"
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I met this woman, and I just fell in love with her.
I know. It's absolutely, honestly, watch yourselves.
There's a lot of us here, in fairness.
Or you know, hope. So I am really interested in that, and I'm interested in that kind of experience. But also, it does feel political. You know, I think it's important. I don't think novelists have a duty to do certain things, but I also think, I mean, even now, it's not necessarily straightforward or easy for lots of people, and I think it's important to show reflection. Also, I just find it interesting because anyone who's a bit on the outside. But it's also, like, When We Were Bad, as you say, there's just a tiny hint. So I don't, obviously, only want to write books about, in which there is someone who turns into a lesbian or is a lesbian, because that's not all I'm interested in, but it's something that keeps happening, I suppose. So, also it's just, you know, it's just very hot sex.
It is very hot.
So, you know, I make no excuses.
No apologies or excuses. Maybe that woman who is the white shirt there. Late onset lesbian.
Yeah.
Okay, gosh, I didn't have a word.
LOL. I'm going to trademark it. I might get T-shirts.
We just do a self-help book
Can we
for
have
late
some
onset
merch?
lesbians.
Yeah.
Seriously.
And I'm not late onset. I was like 23, but I think
Is that
intellectually I was quite late
right?
onset. I was just very bad at being heterosexual. Anyway, carry on, moving on, yes.
Sorry.
Follow that. So one of the questions I was going to ask, and I will ask it, I was trying to understand, you said that it was going to take, closer, I think, it took you 9 years to write this novel. And I now understand, and I'm sorry that you had to go through some of the things that you did. But how do you keep going? What's your writing process? How do you keep going? And are there ever any books that you've abandoned, you know, because it's just taken too long?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Well, The Exhibitionist, you know, 9 years, it has a lot of kind of abandoned attempts. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words on somewhere in my laptop, you know, like down the back of the sofa, of sort of failed attempts. So The Exhibitionist, as well as life events, not just that, but, you know, other things. So I also teach creative writing a bit, and one of the things I'm always explaining is I'm never very good at explaining it because it's so hard to kind of be specific about. But I think the process of writing fiction, as I'm sure many of you have found, is trying to work out what the novel you're trying to write is. So you start, and then you sort of go off in other directions. But you have to keep pulling yourself back to the sort of feelings, the experiences that you wanted to be writing about. So I finally worked out with The Exhibitionist. I wanted it to be about this marriage. I wanted to have this man like Ray. It's also funny, so I wrote it, well, for most of my 40s, but a friend of mine who's been one of the sort of pioneers of the whole HRT menopause-y books type things said it's basically a kind of middle-aged chaos novel. Mm-hmm. And it's true, because it's a thing that happens to lots of people, that they stop fulfilling that role and start wanting something for themselves. So it took me a long time to work out kind of that's what it was about, I suppose. And most of my novels, it's taken me a long time to work out what it's about. But they're keeping going. I mean, it's a really good question. It's really hard. The fact that I've written 758 novels does not in any way give me confidence or belief that I can do it again, ever. It's the only thing that makes me keep going is it's my job. It's the only thing I'm good at, apart from I'm really good at spitting cherry stones really far, but that is not a profession. It's what I'm for. So I have to do it because, I have to earn money. I have to get fulfillment. What would I be if I wasn't writing? But it's also when I'm kind of at my best in a way. So even though I find it hard and miserable, I just have to sit there and do it. So if you're talking practically, again, something I always say is different people have different ways of... So for me, I say, okay, I'm not going to get up till I've written this number of words. Some people, I'm not going to get up till 12 o'clock. So I think that if people are writing, how to make yourself write, the answer is small increments. It's like AA, one step at a time. You have to just... So that's what I do. That's what I'll probably be doing for the rest of my life, is just saying, okay, yes, you're terrible, no one wants to read your books, but just write 200 words.
Okay.
But it's a really good question.
Sasha, how are we doing for time? Do you one more question? So is there one more brilliant question that we can leave this lovely event with? No pressure at all.
It's a stripy question.
Someone who knows she has a brilliant question.
I'm sorry if this question is too personal based on
There's been a lot of
what you've said. If you could put yourself back to when you first got that diagnosis at such a young age, what do you wish someone had said to you or done for you?
Oh my God, that's such a question. I wish I'd had some support. There were two amazing charities, both of which have fallen apart now, like really small local charities. And I found people in each of them who were really fantastic. But I wish I'd had some support. And I wish I'd known that, 15 years later, I would be so much happier than I was then. It took a long time. And it was hard. But, life feels kind of, there are really good things in my life now that I didn't think there could be. So, but, I do think we have a duty, a kind of feminist duty, to talk about it. And, I'm always saying, tell your sister to ring me up, because, people do feel alone with it. So, I suppose I wish I could have known, I wish I'd had someone that I could have had that conversation with.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that helps.
And that's a nice way to end. I've just loved talking to you, Charlotte.
Likewise.
And I'm so delighted to have met you. I'm so glad that you're here.
The best festival in the world,
yeah.
can I say.
It is. They can put that on the posters next year. It's been great. And thank you all for being an amazing audience. Charlotte Mendelson, and she'll be selling her book, and go and buy it.
Go and buy it. Thank you.